So I'm not going to take up much of your time because I'm here to introduce your first guest speaker, and he's an incredible individual that I'm very honored to know. We've had the privilege to work with Chandos on several occasions because they're also a B-Corp certified company and doing wonderful things in their industry. And so I won't waste any more time. I'd like to introduce Tim Coldwell, President of Chandos Construction, and he's going to share a bit about his story today. And his story is so humble and amazing. I think you're really going to be inspired by what he's actually achieved and what Chandos has allowed him to do. Tim?
Thank you. Right on. Thank you for having me here today, and I'm honored to be here. And before I start this, I'm going to say people have encouraged me over the years to tell more details of my personal story. So I'm going to do that today. And I'm also acutely aware that I'm standing in a faith-based organization. I would start by saying I have great respect for those who have faith, and I've not lost my faith. So I'm going to tell you a story. It's about a life of meaning and purpose. It's also about moral courage and how business can be a force for good. This story is deeply personal for me, and this is the first time I'm going to tell it publicly. I grew up in the world of radical Christianity here in Alberta. Many people have heard about the Westboro Baptist Church. I grew up in that world here. I'm not here today to cast aspersions. I'm acutely aware that I'm standing in a faith-based institution. Yet my childhood was marked by radical intolerance. I was homeschooled because my parents feared what would happen to my beliefs if I met people who believed something different. I was not allowed to play with the neighbor kids because my parents thought that the neighbor kids were godless. My father's an ordained minister. We traveled so he could preach at tent revivals like this one. I didn't see a television until I was 14 because my parents said it was the devil's box. Gospel music was all I knew until I was 15. Because my parents believed rock music was satanic. Women were expected to be submissive, heads covered, long dresses. Many families had dozens of kids because they didn't believe in contraception. Children nearly died because vaccines were not part of God's plan. We were taught that Muslims were to be feared and that women should not get an education. Yes, that happens in Alberta. We were taught that LGBTQ people were going to hell. I distinctly remember protesting in the street as a 6-year-old. We were taught to fear the other. Child services took some kids away from their parents when I was about 5 or 6 because they weren't getting an education. They couldn't read, they couldn't write, they couldn't do basic arithmetic. So kids were doing drills with guns and gasoline on what to do if the government agents came back. I remember seeing an exorcism performed on a person with bipolar disorder, because we thought the person was demon-possessed. Kids that I were friends with were sexually abused. People I once respected went to jail. We lived in a remote community, no school, no TV, no movies. I'd play, experiment, and tinker, and then we'd drive to the library in town. I couldn't go to the fiction section because that was off limits, so I took books out of the nonfiction section. I read the entire Encyclopedia Britannica by the time I was 10. There's nothing better to do. The nonfiction section of the library was near the classics. My parents didn't know I was sneaking them home, reading by flashlight between volumes of the encyclopedia. Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, War and Peace by Tolstoy, Dickens, Twain, Aristotle, Plato, Machiavelli. I was reading this stuff when I was 10 years old. And I must say that my mother taught me to taught me to read at a very high level. And without that, I don't know where I would be. Literature was my saving grace. I started to question the fear and the hate, and one day a voice inside of me said, "This is not right." So I left. I was expelled from the fundamentalist social group that I'd been part of, and I became dead to my friends at church. I was in my mid-teens working night shift at a sawmill. I'm status Mohawk, and I learned I can get a full scholarship from the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte in Deseronto, Ontario, to study engineering at the University of Alberta, if I graduated high school with an 89% average. I had never seen a teacher in my life. And so I took every penny that I had as working in the lumber mill, and I hired a tutor. And I did distance learning through Barhead's education program here in the province of Alberta. and I got my scholarship. I got the 89% average. The first time I ever set foot in a classroom was when I stepped into the Torrey Lecture Theatre at the University of Alberta. I was like a feral animal, terrified. I'd escaped from the bush, pretty much. No social skills, zero. And I was taking a full-time engineering course load while working 12, 14 hours at the night shift, on night shift at this lumber mill. I couldn't make ends meet, my grades were poor, alone, no friends, no support network. I was days away from being in a cardboard box on the street. I was actually in the process of eviction where I was kind of couch surfing. But then I got a job with Chandos. I didn't have the best experience or the best grades. I didn't have any network. I didn't have any connection to get the job, but it just kind of happened. And Chandos gave me a chance. And I found a second family and a deep sense of purpose and a connection to the organization. Shortly after, I met my spouse, that's Angie. A couple years later, we were married. Angie's side of the church was packed. My side of the church was full of Chandos people. My parents, siblings, and church friends were invited and didn't attend. Angie's my rock. We have two wonderful little girls. I have a deep personal connection to this company. It's a second family for me. 20 years later, I'm the president of this organization, and I'm humbled to be given that opportunity. We're a national technical builder, leading change in the construction industry. We're named after Chandos Lake in the Kawartha Highlands of Ontario. That's me at the lake with my mentors. I'm on the left, and that's Tom Rettle and Dan O'Brien. Tom was the second president of Chandos, and Dan was the founder. I owe them a lot, and they've been great mentors to me over the years, and they continue to be great mentors. So what does this story have to do with purpose, and how does this connect? Well, my story is about having the courage to live your life, not the life that others wanted for you. I had the courage to stand against fear, and it's been how I've lived my life ever since. I've reinvented myself several times at Chandos, staying in what I call the sweet spot. It's the intersection of what you like to do, what the organization needs, and what you're actually good at. The sweet spot moves around as the organization evolves, and as we evolve as people. The trick is to have the courage to move to the sweet spot. And I've always lived my life so if at the end of the workday it felt like it was 5 minutes, then I'm in my sweet spot. And if you're counting the time to get to the end of the workday, there's something wrong, and you need to have the courage to make a change. There's a great advert based on the poem by the American poet Charles Bukowski. The poem's called So You Want to Be a Writer. Great ad, check it out.
If it doesn't come bursting out of you, in spite of everything, don't do it. Unless it comes unasked out of your heart and your mind and your mouth and your gut, don't do it. If you're doing it for money or fame, don't do it. If you're doing it because you want women in your bed, don't do it. If it's hard work, just thinking about doing it, don't do it. If you're trying to write like somebody else, forget about it. If you have to wait for it to roar out of you, then wait, patiently. If it never does roar out of you, do something else. If you first have to read it to your wife or your girlfriend or your boyfriend or your parents or to anybody at all, you're not ready. Don't be dull and boring and pretentious. Don't be consumed with self-love. Don't do it. Unless it comes out of your soul like a rocket. Don't do it. Unless the sun inside you is burning your gut. Don't do it. When it is truly time, if you have been chosen, it will do it by itself. And then it will keep on doing it until you die, or it dies in you. There is no other way, and there never was.
Yeah, so if I leave you with, if I've got one of the main messages today is this idea of living true to yourself. Purpose is about courage. Have the courage to live the life true to yourself, not the life others expect of you. People ask me if I harbor any anger, and I don't. My upbringing gave me an advantage in the work world, especially in the area of innovation. Think about it. My early days were basically unstructured play because I didn't go to school. No TV, no movies, no video games. My days were full of tinkering, experimentation, and books. like these kids here, enjoying unstructured play and discovery. That was me, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. I tried to build things I'd seen in books, encyclopedias, and that was a ton of fun. You know, the best way to get your kid to do something is to tell them not to do it. And so that's played out in my life as well. I was taught to fear people who were different and only hang out with people who were like me. And so I did the opposite. I'd seek different out. I'd seek the other out. And so we do the same at Chandos. And I can't take credit for all of what we do at Chandos. It's a great team. I'm one small part of that. But we often take groups of staff to visit innovative companies in completely different industries who are doing things completely different than us. We visited Suffolk and Boston to learn about journalists turned into project managers in the construction industry. DPR in San Francisco to learn about integrated project delivery. Herrero in San Francisco to learn about lean. Lindbeck in Dallas, Texas to learn about virtual design and construction. Skanska in Sweden to learn about diversity and inclusion in the construction industry. And Katera in San Francisco to learn about prefab. Over the last 6 years, we've added incremental revenue of $1.2 billion, while increasing average margin by roughly 2%. We are leading the $500 million redevelopment of the Chalk River Nuclear Reactor Complex outside of Peterborough, Ontario, because of what we learned from people who were different. We as an organization really have no right to be working on a nuclear reactor, but we learned from people who were different, brought that back in, and created a market for it. Without that, and without learning from others, our Vancouver, Kelowna, Toronto, and Ottawa expansions would have been exponentially more difficult. Our secret sauce, we let our people fail, experiment, and play, and we seek the other. Let's shift gears. From the connection to innovation to the connection to purpose. Should business exist just to make a profit? What is the purpose of a corporation, and how can we help our people find purpose within our organization? Corporations have 17 times more resources than all charities, and 7 times more resources than all governments. What if business was a force for good? Chandos is the largest B-Corp contractor in the world. We're interested in doing social good at scale. We're a national technical builder with sales of $700 million and a growth strategy to double the size of the company in 7 to 10 years. That will create approximately 600 high-paying jobs. And if you factor in baby boomer retirements and natural turnover, we expect to hire 1,000 people within the next 7 or 8 years. And what if we use that growth as an opportunity to hire at-risk youth like me 20 years ago, an opportunity to hire indigenous people, an opportunity to move the needle on gender diversity. We at Chandos are proud of what we do, but we also recognize that we're just one company. What if contractors banded together and said, we're going to do this? I've had this conversation with PCL, Elliston, Graham, Ledcor, great competitors of ours. We can have inclusive hiring practices. We can recycle construction waste. We can increase gender diversity. We can attract the best and the brightest. And we as contractors do not need to be given permission to do that. We don't need government to set policy to tell us that we should do that. We have the power to do that today. The House of Commons passed Bill C-344 in 2018. The bill would encourage builders like Chandos to deliver community benefits, making a willingness to deliver those benefits part of contractor selection criteria. The bill was endorsed by community groups across Canada. In 2019, just a couple months ago, a directive was issued by Carla Qualtrough, the Minister of Public Works and Procurement Services Canada. The directive implements the spirit of C-344 for federally funded projects. If you're a city, a municipality, any sort of not-for-profit, and you have federal dollars, you have to abide by this policy statement. A significant part of the selection criteria for those contractors would be based on what social good does that contractor do in the local community where the spend is happening. Earlier this year, the cities of Toronto and Vancouver both mandated social procurement. The rest of these organizations are developing or have implemented already policies that reward contractors for delivering community benefits on their projects. Many in our industry are opposed to this. They say, we don't have a problem with diversity. And if you look at the construction industry, it's 95% dudes. So there is a problem with diversity. They say this forces us to hire from an inferior labor pool. Yeah, they actually said that. They said that in writing. The argument was that if you force us to hire these people, they're not as good as other people, and the productivity is less, and it will cost the Canadian taxpayer more. They say that construction gives a lot of money to charity, and it's true. Per GDP, the construction industry gives more money to charity than any other industry. But that's part of the problem. This idea that business exists to make a profit. You create this profit, and then you cut a check, and you give it to social enterprises, and you give it to charity, and you wipe your hands, and you say, I'm done. I've done my good social corporate responsibility piece. This is Michael Porter, the modern father of business strategy, an absolute legend. He's probably the most powerful thinker in the world of business. 10 years ago, he started talking about shared value. He called on businesses to solve the world's greatest challenges and thereby create more profit and more differentiation for them. I highly recommend his TED Talk on the subject. It's about 18 minutes. It's worth your time. Some of you will remember And One Shoes. They were one of the first socially conscious companies in America, until the founders sold out to a private equity firm. That social consciousness soon disappeared from the business. Employees and suppliers felt betrayed, and the co-founders were racked with guilt. So they started B-Labs, a nonprofit that exists to certify socially conscious businesses. It's a way businesses can prove that they walk the talk. The B-Corp movement started in 2007, and there are thousands of B-Corps today. As I mentioned, Chandos is the largest certified general contractor in the world. This is Larry Fink, the chairman of BlackRock. His firm is the largest investor in the world with assets under management of $7 trillion. Larry is famous for calling on CEOs to embed social purpose in their businesses. BlackRock has data that proves that social purpose leads to higher profit. Wall Street pays attention when Larry speaks. These folks represent the Business Roundtable, a powerful group of about 200 Fortune 500 CEOs. They were in the news earlier this year, and they recently challenged the idea of shareholder supremacy. All 181 of them changed the purpose statement of their organizations to be less about shareholder supremacy and more about stakeholder supremacy. And just as an interesting aside, if you're on a board in an American corporation, you have a fiduciary responsibility to maximize return on investment for the shareholder. If you're on the board of a Canadian corporation, you have a fiduciary responsibility to do what is right for the corporation. It's a big difference. And I think that's part of why the business climate between the two countries are different. One of the best examples I have of solving some of the world's greatest challenges with an existing business model is Adidas. How many in the room have heard about Adidas's Parley for the Ocean partnership? Okay, this is half the room. That's good. Most people don't. It's this idea, Parley was this not-for-profit NGO running around essentially with a tugboat and some nets, fishing plastic out of the ocean. And Adidas went to them and said, what if we invested? What if we commercialized technology to recycle this plastic and turn them into shoes? And so they did. And so these are the first shoes that came out. So these shoes retail for $325 American, and each pair of shoes has 11 bottles fished out of the ocean. And the first year they wanted to sell for a few 100,000 of these things. They sold 1 million. 3 years in, they've sold approximately 17 million pairs of these things. At $325 a pop, I can't do the math in my head, but it's $4 or $5 billion. They put $4 or $5 billion of incremental revenue into their organization by solving a pollution problem. And then the next piece of the story is they then advanced the technology and they figured out how to weave fabrics out of it. So in Europe right now, most of those jerseys that the FIFA players are playing in were woven from ocean garbage. It's coming to the NHL next year, I understand. And then what they've done next is they figured out how to do a circular economy shoe. So the idea is the shoe retails for $650. It's launching in a few weeks here. You buy the shoe, it comes with a bag, prepaid postage. You wear the shoe. When you're done with it, you put it in the bag. It goes back to the factory. They grind it down. They make a new shoe. They never go back out and get more plastic. Check it out.
If we can see things for what they are, if we can see what they could be, if the plastic we use, we never throw away. If the end of one thing could be the beginning of the next. If we know that less can create more. If we can return, we reciprocate, we regenerate. If we are here for others, if we can work as a team, all we have to do is connect, and the world opens up. The future is about giving back.
Pretty cool, eh? The future is about giving back. That's the line that I take from that ad from Adidas. Earlier this year, Chandos did a cross-country tour about giving back. We called it Industry with Purpose. Our headliners were Afdel Aziz, world-renowned marketer. He wrote a book called Good is the New Cool, Market Like You Give a Damn. And Craig Kilberger, the We Day guy, among many other things. All told, 3,000 people attended the events in Toronto, Edmonton, Calgary, and Vancouver. We got a ton of press, and frankly, we got 5 or 6 construction deals out of the project because people want to work with contractors who share the same values that they have. Following the events, we engaged Afdel to help us refine our brand framework. We had what we think is a good brand framework, but thought it could be better, and so we spent some time working with him. So I'm going to step through in the next couple minutes here. But before I do that, here are 5 stats on why brand matters. 89% of customers are loyal to brands that share their personal values. 92% of employees, and this is staggering to me, 92% of employees would change jobs to work for a company that has values that more closely align to their personal values. Now, I got to say that that's all things being equal. Same compensation, same commute, same upward mobility. If you want to win the war for talent, you have to connect the values of your organization to the personal values of the people that are working inside of it. 87% of employees do not have a sense of purpose in their work. They're disengaged. So think about that. 13% of the people on the face of this planet go to work and really love their job. The rest of them are like, eh. And what if we as an organization could go from 13% to 23%? Moving the needle 10% on engagement will blow the doors off of all of your competitors. And I think that's the future in the war for talent. 64% of those born between 80 and 95, so millennials, won't take a job unless the employer is socially responsible. 85% of those born between 95, oh, there's a typo, and 2000, believe companies have a moral obligation to solve social issues, a moral obligation. This is Rosa Parks, who in 1955 resisted bus segregation, sparking the Montgomery boycott. She represents moral courage. I'm going to show a clip of Bill George. Bill George is the CEO of Medtronic and author of a great book called True North, Discover Your Authentic Leadership.
There's a big change taking place in CEOs today because they have the courage to stand up for what they believe in and be outspoken about. There was a time when everyone kind of hunched down and didn't hunker down and didn't want to say anything and go below the radar screen. Now I think they feel it's so purposeful. Let me give you an example of someone who did that. Ken Frazier, CEO of Merck, was so offended by President Trump's comments after Charlottesville that he resigned from his council. And he now didn't do it quietly, he put out a statement. And you realize that everything Merck does, their whole purpose is often dependent on approvals from the US government for every new drug, quality, pricing. And so it is an example of extreme moral courage. But I think more and more CEOs are having the courage to find their voice and stand up for what they believe in. Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, stands up and says he will not accept what's going on in Indiana or North Carolina with discrimination against people who are LGBTQ. And so he has that courage to find his voice. Mark Benioff, the same way, of Salesforce, and that's such admiration. If your company has a purpose, you've got to stand up and be counted. You've got to say, this is wrong. And so I think you have to find your voice and have that courage. Do the right thing. Do you take a risk? Absolutely. But if you don't, the greater risk is that you don't believe in anything and your employees watch what you do. After the Parkland shooting, you know, what's your feeling about guns? I want a safe neighborhood. I want safe kids, safe schools for our employees' kids to go to school in, my own kids. And I want it to be a safe place. So that's a community question. Our community's got to come together and ensure the safety of our young people. If we don't, who will?
So there's a couple of great books out there. David Brooks wrote Tuesdays with Maury, among other things. These 2 books are great. If you're interested in the idea of moral courage and what it takes inside of yourself to really have the courage to go down that path, I encourage these 2 books. I'm going to switch gears here, and as I mentioned, we hired Afdel Aziz to work with us on a brand framework. Afdel has worked with the largest brands in the world, and I'm going to step you through the outcome for Chandos. And the best way to think about this is many of you will have been familiar with Simon Sinek and his start with why concept, but you start at the center and you communicate outwards. Purpose is why you exist as an organization. Vision is what you aim to achieve. Your mission, plural, they can often be plural, is how you plan to achieve the vision, and values are what we stand for and how we behave. Keep in mind, you're going to get a copy of these slides with the dialogue.live app, so you don't need to write it down. And positioning is how you're going to be different and the promise you're going to make to the market. So here's where we landed. Our purpose is to exist to build a better world. It's pretty aspirational. We're going for aspirational. And building, a strong verb linked to industry. Better has this idea of continuous improvement and movement towards our best selves. Our vision is to be the most collaborative and innovative builder in North America by 2030. This was an interesting conversation with the team. We purposely chose the word builder instead of contractor, because builder evokes a more aspirational way of being. You can build a great building, you can build great people, you can build a great society, you can build a great community. That's why we went in that direction. You got to have a time bound on this, so we said in the next 10 years, that's what we want to be. And then our people are very proud of the organization, and so they would say, well, we're probably the most collaborative contractor in Canada. You know, we have no evidence that that's true, but a lot of our people would think that. And I wanted our folks to be aspirational and a little bit more humble, and so we moved kind of the landscape from Canada to North America, because frankly there are contractors in the United States that would blow our doors off on most of the things that we're doing. There's some amazing organizations down there. And then in terms of missions, this is a great way of thinking of it, and they ladder outwards. There's a company mission, an industry mission, a community mission, and a planet mission. The company mission, 100% employee-owned, B-Corp certified, national technical builder. We're not the right contractor to build warehouses in the field. And we balance people and profit. The industry mission is we move industry towards collaboration by championing integrated project delivery and inclusive hiring. The community mission, we build thriving communities via community benefit agreements and social procurement. And on the planet front, we recycle waste on 100% of our construction projects and use sustainable construction techniques to minimize impact. Jen Hancock is our VP of Collaborative Construction. She's somewhere in the audience here today and is speaking later in the afternoon. If you're interested in how we've recycled construction waste, I encourage you to have a conversation with her. She's led that effort in the organization. Since 2001, we've diverted on average 80% of the entire waste stream that we've generated over the years. Back to my comments about leadership, I think we're the only general contractor in Canada that does that. Everyone else waits to be told. Waits till the architect makes it a requirement. Waits till the owner makes it a requirement. You don't have to wait, and you can just do it. And we've been having some great conversation with some of our competitors about banding together and forming a group where we all do that. Jim Collins wrote probably the best business book out there, Good to Great, and he had a monograph that he published earlier this year on the idea of a flywheel, and we're really interested in that. And we framed our values as an organization in terms of a flywheel, and it starts with inclusivity. And so the 100% employee ownership model that we've had as an organization is an inclusive model. Everyone is invited to own. It's not just for salaried employees. It's not just for a select group of people who are shareholders. Everybody in this company gets to own. There's a single class of voting shares. The integrated project delivery method that we use across Canada is about inclusivity. It gives a voice to carpenters and laborers and plumbers and electricians who've been in the business for 25 years and never been asked by a designer what they think about how the building should be designed. Social procurement is about engaging in the local community and including the local community in the construction project. My point here is that Chandos has always been about inclusivity. So it starts with inclusivity, and then it moves on towards collaboration. This idea that we learn from each other. And when you're open to the idea that you might not be right and that you could learn something from the other, that's where great innovation comes from. And you see things differently. And there's a difference between innovation or ingenuity and having an idea and innovation. There's lots of people who have ideas. Ideas are cheap. They're a dime a dozen. People go to coffee shops, they write it down in their moleskin notebook, if only, if only, if only, and nothing ever gets done. You have to have the courage to actually implement and do the idea. And so to take this back, starts with inclusivity, get the right people in the conversation, then it moves to collaboration. When you do that, and if great ideas happen, you have the courage to innovate, and the whole organization moves forward, and the cycle starts again, because the organization is different, and you need to bring different people into the conversation to take you where you want to go. Positioning this idea of we build better together. This is our corporate promise to the industry. We're very inclusive. We want to do collaborative project delivery. That's what we're about. Putting it all together in one slide, that's what it ends up looking like. We're in the process of creating some video content, and I don't have a draft of it yet, but this is the copy for it, so I'll just briefly read it. At Chandos, we see things differently. Where others see buildings, we see communities. Where others see employees, we see owners. Where others see vendors, we see partners. Where others see customers, we see guests. Where others see at-risk youth, we see future leaders. We see a world that is better if we build it with equal opportunity for all. Because we believe that before we build walls, first the walls must come down. We are Chandos, we build better together. So I'm going to end with this, and this is what it looks like for us as an organization. My wife is a high school science teacher, so she's got a very good viewpoint into schools, and she'll tell me about really smart kids that want to do well, being held back. There's issues at home. They're on the bus 3 hours a day, working minimum wage at Subway, trying to put food on the table for a brother or a sister because mom or dad aren't around or in crime or in drugs. Let's hire that kid. Let's give that kid a chance. Instead of hiring the kid that thinks it's beneath them to push a broom for 19 bucks an hour on a construction site and can't wait to get off the job site. That's really what we're doing.
So right now I'm continuing with my apprenticeship to get my Red Seal, which is a 4-year program. And then I'm wanting to get into eventually project management.
It's my first year apprenticeship for carpentry. I've been with the company for roughly just over 10 months now.
And my overall goal after I become a journeywoman is to go back and mentor the children, the youth, and women or anyone in the reserve who would like to learn more about carpentry.
We provide training to employment services for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. We offer resume development, job search, personal one-on-one counseling.
I went there to get some safety tickets renewed, and I also got referred to Chandos. So I went in for an interview and then I was hired with Chandos, and ever since I've been loving my job here at Northwest.
It's not just about being a good corporate citizen. There is an ROI in this. It does make the organization better. Organizations like ourselves should just give people a chance and give them the opportunity in which they can grow and develop. And really, that's what it's about.
Anytime you can help a younger person along in their career, it is quite exciting in my books. I love to teach and I love to mentor. The program that is giving us a greater opportunity to do that with some of the indigenous staff.
We're going into our 4th year of operating the center, and we've served over 3,700 clients.
Yeah, so just to put a point on how this can work in our world, as I mentioned, we're going to hire 1,000 people in 7 years or so. And what if we hired a ton of people like them? We'd have this amazing workforce that would go to the wall for us, come to work full of passion, love their job. There's a huge problem, there's a huge labor crisis in the construction industry. And laddering up is we hire laborers for 19 bucks an hour. Every general contractor in Canada that's of any size pays for their people to go through the apprenticeship program. Apprentice carpenters, it's a 4-year program, but the average carpentry rate is 24 bucks an hour, straight time, across Canada. It's higher in Toronto, higher in Vancouver. And journeyman carpenters make $36.80 an hour, straight time. Foremen make $43.80 an hour, straight time. With overtime, that's 120 grand a year. We've had general foremen drag down 200 grand, working ridiculous overtime. That's quite common in the industry. So we can take people who are on a path towards crime and or poverty, and in a matter of 4 or 5 years, give them a high-paying job in the construction industry, and it costs us nothing to do that. We're going to hire these people anyways. So it cost us nothing. And if you think of the social ROI on that, it's infinite. There's zero cost to do it, and there's all these great benefits to society. The strain on the Canadian social system is reduced. Tax revenue is increased in the local community. We as an organization have an engaged, passionate workforce. We self-perform concrete in many instances. When you have a passionate self-perform crew, they blow the doors off the competition in terms of productivity. You can lower your bid rates, you win more work, you can add more margin. The idea just gets better and better and better. And the public policy conversation around contractor selection is starting to figure this out. Doing this is good for the Canadian society. It reduces the strain on the Canadian social system. So if you're spending taxpayer dollars, you should spend it on an organization that does this kind of work for the community. And that's where the public policy conversation is going in Canada, and I'm really excited about where that takes us. So I'm going to finish with this. If you could change a life for the better, would you do it? And also, what business model do you have that could easily be adapted to change lives for the better? Thank you for having me here today. Yeah. Thank you.
It would seem your message really landed.
Good.
Right? You've given us lots of food for thought. So inspiring, your personal story and the story of Chandos itself. So we have just a few minutes, and I'm wondering, I mean, like I say, you've given us lots of food for thought, a lot of great comment and advice, but just one last question about maybe a lesson or two that you've learned along the way that you could share.
Yeah, the one that that stuck with me most recently is when we started as an organization to do innovative stuff. We were really proud about it, and we wanted to be protective, and we didn't want to share it with the industry. I had, big knockdown, drag-out arguments with our board, actually, about what do you mean you're open sourcing the secret sauce and giving it away to your competitors? But the thing that we learned, if you try to protect it, it doesn't work. And what you want to do is you really want to find your allies. You want to get more people in the conversation. And yeah, you might be educating the competition in some instances, but the movement happens 100 times faster. And it makes the pie bigger for everybody. So that, for me, was a big one recently.
So the collaboration goes at many different levels,
yeah.
You're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. Tim Coldwell from Chandos Construction, thank you so much.
Great. Nice to see you.
Extraordinary.
Good stuff.
Thank you.